I'm here today to give a presentation, but before I start presenting, I'm going to ask the interpreter to hold off for a moment so you can get an idea of my signing style. I came here today to give this presentation, which you already know, considering the fact that you're sitting here watching me. Alright, I'm going to continue on and ask the interpreter to go ahead and continue interpreting for me. All of you have been sitting here a few minutes seeing me sign and probably wondering why the interpreter is here. You may be wondering why I even have an interpreter here. I brought the interpreter in not only for myself, because I'm signing, but also for the rest of you, because you guys do not know sign language. I brought the interpreter here to allow both of us to communicate. If you have a question, the interpreter will sign, and I will be able to understand your question. This allows equal access for communication for both, for me and for all of you. In general, people assume that interpreters are only for deaf people, but it's important to keep in mind that the interpreter is here for hearing and as well as for the deaf. I'm going to go ahead and ask you a multiple choice question and give you several answers to choose from. You'll have 4 choices, and I need you to pick which answer you think is correct. Don't worry about getting a wrong answer. If you make a mistake, it's okay, as long as you learn from your mistakes and are able to pick up on some information. We're only here for an hour, so we can't go really in depth with the information, but at least you'll walk away with learning something. touching on several different topics, and I'm only going to be able to make comments on a few, or I'm only going to be able to touch on a couple of those topics and can't go very in depth. But once you leave here, I encourage you to go and do research to learn more about each of the topics that interest you. Throughout my presentation, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll try to answer them as best as possible. It's important for you to leave with the answers to any questions that you have. Many deaf people are afraid to ask questions because they're they're just scared to ask. So I encourage you to make sure that you leave here with all the information that you wanted to learn. Like I said, it's important to remember that this is a lecture for your benefit and that you're here to learn. So make sure you ask any questions. And now I'm going to go ahead and ask you some questions, and I'm going to ask for you guys to respond, and then I'll count and see which answer is correct. Okay, first question. What do you call a person who cannot hear? Do you call them deaf, hard of hearing, hearing impaired, physically disabled? Or the last option, you just don't know what to call them. Okay, raise your hand if you chose deaf. Okay, around 10 people? Okay, how many people chose hard of hearing? None? I anticipated a lot of people to raise their hand. I'm surprised no one voted for that one. Hearing impaired? How many of you voted for hearing impaired? 3 of you? Okay. The fourth one, how many of you thought physically disabled was the correct answer? None of you? Okay. And let's see, how many of you just had no idea what to call a person who cannot hear? None? All right. All right. The correct answer to that question is deaf. If you're if you are deaf, that means that you cannot hear, that you're involved within the deaf culture, and that you use ASL, and that you're fully immersed within the deaf world, and that being deaf has become a part of you, and that is what you identify with. All across America, there are almost 16,000 people who are deaf or hard of hearing or hearing impaired. And now, if we just look at the state of Massachusetts, you'll see that there are 300,000 people with hearing loss. And then within that group of people, there's 40,000 people who are completely deaf. All right. I'll come back to that later about talking about the divisions of hearing impaired and the deaf. Now, moving on to the next question. Many people think that there is a universal sign language that is used all around the world. Is that true or false? True? How many people think it's true? How many people think it's false? Wow, everyone thinks it's true. And that's correct. The correct answer is true. Or there is not a universal sign language. Europe has their own sign language, as well as America. We use American Sign Language, which is shortened into ASL. ASL consists of hand movements along with facial expressions and body gestures. All of these combine together to form a complete language. interpreters are required to do a lot of training. They really need to become fluent in the languages that they're working into. Sometimes you'll notice if we have an interpreter or a presentation that's done in sign language, they'll be asked to hold while the interpreter voicing is able to catch up. One example with sign language is the word run. In a spoken language, you just simply have the word run, R-U-N. But with sign language, there's multiple different signs that all mean the word run. For example, running a race, running water, running like a faucet running, a river running. There's all different uses for that one word. Okay, another question. Many people believe that deaf people are experts at reading lips. Is this true or false? True? How many of you think it's true? Raise your hand. Alright, one of you. And how many of you think it's false? Okay, around 8, 9. Looks like most of you guys are right with that one. Research shows that deaf people, only 35% of deaf people can read lips. That means that most of the time a deaf person only can catch bits and pieces of what is being said through lip reading.